Okay, cool. All right. Thanks again for being here. I think I'll start us off with our opening prayer tonight. Our dear Heavenly Father, we're grateful for this day. We're grateful for all the blessings that we have and for the blessing to be able to study and learn the things that we need to learn. And we ask that as we come together for this group discussion, that we might be blessed with the Spirit, that we can learn from one another and share our thoughts and ideas, and please help us to always strive to come closer to Thee and do what is right. And we love Thee very much. And we ask for these blessings in the name of Jesus Christ. Amen. Okay. So before we go over the case, did anyone have any? Well, I guess maybe I'll start with the synopsis and then I'll ask if anyone had any questions. So, as we read about the Columbia and how they, about how NASA had a background with these, the foam debris breaking off and causing damage to the space shuttles. And when it first happened, it was a problem, and then it kind of became, just this accepted thing. But in the case of Columbia, it did enough damage to actually destroy the shuttle and kill the astronauts inside upon their re-entry into the atmosphere. And as the case showed, while they were still in space, there was a lot of argument and really dismay about how big of a problem it was or how they could fix it. And so the thing that it says here is that it says 7 months after the Columbia accident Investigation Board presented their report on the causes of the accident. The board pinpointed the technical cause of the accident. It also identified organizational issues within NASA dating back decades. The Accident Investigation Board also reported how a manager might have behaved differently during the mission and stressed the organizational shortcoming at NASA that contributed to the catastrophe. So I guess, does anybody have any questions or any opening thoughts that they want to share about the case?
I didn't like that it seemed like NASA didn't care.
Yeah, it seemed to me that it was kind of weird how they took it, like how most people took it so lightly, like, oh, it's not a big deal.
Yeah. It was obvious that it could cause a really big problem, but because nothing had happened before, they were like, well, why should something happen now, right? But they shouldn't have taken that risk.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I think if you push a problem under the carpet in hopes that it's just going to disappear or not going to be a problem in the future, it just gets bigger and bigger and bigger. And it really annoyed me that they just kept on saying, oh, it just became an acceptable thing. It just really bothered me.
Yeah, I hate it when they said it was this is just something that's a part of the job. You're putting all these people's lives, they're dying, and it's because of, they're overlooking things that are just part of the job, and that's not how to handle things.
Right. So one of the questions that the discussion asks is, because when the first time it happened, everybody saw it as a huge problem.
Mm-hmm.
But the question that it asks is, why did the debris strike become an acceptable risk?
They kept getting away with it. Nothing happened, so on and so forth. So they just completely ignored it rather than try to fix it anyway. They just thought,
Yeah,
well, if it's not doing any harm, then we're not going to worry about it.
Yeah. And
they just had lack. Sorry.
What was that?
so another
Okay,
thing
yeah,
that I
that's what.
didn't
Oh, go ahead.
like,
Go ahead, Sydney.
like it said that the manager took like a scientific approach. Like, if you cannot prove to me that it'll do this much, then let's not worry about it. And that really, like, I think that was one of the biggest problems, is that the manager was willing to like just move on with it. And if the leader is just like, okay, move on with it, then nobody else is going to. And he also dismissed a lot of the opinions that people were giving, which just doesn't make sense to me. But I think a huge problem was like the manager.
Right. Well, it's like with the Challenger example that happened before that, when the engineer said it's not gonna, like, we're gonna be in trouble because of this, and then that was the exact thing that caused that problem. And he's like, well, can you prove that it's like this, instead of being like, okay, maybe this is something we should look into because we're dealing with human lives and billions of dollars at risk here.
Well, I was kind of appalled by how they're like, if it's something we don't address before the next mission, then they just drop it. So it's like, even though they didn't get to solving that problem, it's like since they start a new mission, they just forgot about it. Like, they just kind of pushed it aside, put it on the back burner, and then, eventually forgot about it. I think that was with the O-rings. That's kind of what happened with those.
Yeah, and I think I read in some part that they were like stressed because they had to launch on other missions. So they were like, they wanted to launch all the missions and be better than the other ones, and they didn't even worry about what they could improve, right? And the mistakes they were making, they wouldn't improve that. And that was horrible.
Yeah, going along with what Gabriela said, it seemed like they wanted to be first no matter what. Didn't matter if they were right or not, if people were in danger or not, they were going to be first.
Right.
Yeah, and the mission just became more important than the technical problems that they were experiencing or the people's lives.
Right. So it says that it talks about three basic kind of biases, and it says cognitive biases are systematic errors in judgment. Confirmation bias is our tendency to look for information that confirms our existing views, and sunk cost bias, which is our tendency to escalate commitment to a course of action into which we have already invested time, money, or other resources. So dealing with those three biases, I see sunk cost kind of is one of the big ones. Like, we're into this already, we've got to make the launch date. No matter what happens, we have to go through with this because of all the time that we've already invested.
Yeah, I could really see that with the way they were acting. I don't know how much pressure they were from the outside to have to do that. I feel like it was kind of their own goal that they set. They put that stress on themselves.
Yeah.
The fact that they had, like, in the beginning, they really struggled to get like money to fund their missions. So I think that also like increased the pressure and sense of like, okay, we need to make this like a success, because if it fails, then we've wasted so much money and so much effort into trying to acquire the funds and making it possible.
Yeah.
Right. What was I gonna say? Oh, I was gonna ask you guys because it wasn't really clear to me. Like, with all these goals that they set, that wasn't in place by the government, right? That came from within the organization and NASA. Is that right?
I'm pretty
Yeah, I
sure.
think so.
So that's like one thing that I think about. Like, why did they go crazy like
It
that?
kind
I
of
think
talks.
because they were competing with the Soviet Union, and they just wanted to be better. Yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah, they were competing, and they also talked about lowering the cost per mission
Mhm.
because they got granted what $28 billion, and they
Yeah.
cut costs to be 7 million per mission.
7.7. Yep.
So I think that's one of the reasons why they aim for so many missions, is to make it seem like it was more worthwhile per cost.
Right. So when did the problems with like when would we say that the root of the problems for the Columbia failure began?
I think it started right from the start. They their management was horrible. They didn't address problems early enough. Communication was horrible, and I thought it was right from the start.
Like all
Yeah.
the way back from the
I
beginning
agree.
of NASA.
Yeah,
Yes.
I agree. I think it also like just escalated when they started competing with the European space organized people. So when they started, it just went downhill from there. It just became worse because they were not focused on improving what they had, just focused on being better than the others, than the European people.
Right.
yeah. And I
Yeah.
guess I
Here.
kind of go ahead, Gabrielle.
Oh, thanks. Here in the case study, it says foam debris strikes caused damage to every mission in the history of the space shuttle program. So they always had problems with that, right? But they didn't address them in the correct way, because if they just had a plan to solve it, nothing bad should have happened. But they just didn't care. That was a big problem from the start.
Hmm. Yeah, and I guess I kind of retract my statement about from the very beginning, because with what was it, Project Apollo, they
Yeah.
assembled the Tiger team. So I think maybe after that point, they thought,
Yeah.
well, we already experienced this bad thing. It can't happen again. So I think they got complacent after that.
Yeah, I think that it was just part of it was like this orbiter is it's the oldest orbiter in NASA, and then they also said that it's been a lot of times with repairs in between missions. I mean, and that alone kind of shows that the way they're set up to like handle problems is just not efficient. If they have to spend so much time repairing an orbiter that's supposed to keep people safe and collect all this research and experience, and they have to keep repairing it, that's not proper. There's something missing, you know, something's going wrong.
Yeah.
Yeah. So how would we describe the culture at NASA? Like when I read this question, I kind of thought about like if I was going to work for NASA, like or if I already worked there, how would I describe like the culture of the company?
There's no communication, a lot of bureaucracy.
Yeah, I completely agree with that, Gabriella. They seem just really laid back to almost the point where they were lazy, because there was something towards the end. Yeah, on page 7, The person who held top secret clearance and was supposed to ask the military for help to look at the damage, it said he agreed to look into it, which he did 5 days later.
Right. On a 16-day mission.
Yep.
Yeah. Any other thoughts on kind of the culture of the organization?
I also think that like there was some arrogance, and like I just did not like the leader, and he was the one that fostered this. If like lead in something, you're supposed to be proactively checking on people and not telling them that, oh, you know, just prove me wrong. And I don't know, I didn't like that.
We definitely lack like a team effort, and I think that was one of my suggestions for the problem, is that they need to have a team that handles certain different things. And I don't know, I was kind of reading this and then thinking about how unorganized NASA is, and thinking of all the little kids who want to be astronauts one day, you know, and then it's like, do they really know how unorganized NASA is after I read this? But it's like,
is this real?
that, yeah, it's like you would hope that NASA, they're you know, team up with Boeing, you know, a very successful company, and it's like you want them to be successful, and it's like they're not performing up to those standards that, you know, to represent our country, to represent, you know, space travel, and it's kind of a disappointment.
Right. Well, and I like think about it from the astronauts' perspective. You know, it makes me wonder if any of the astronauts ever sat in a meeting with all these people who are making decisions about
They
their
wouldn't go
lives.
up, would they?
I don't think if I was
so.
sitting there and they were like, "Yeah, prove me wrong," he's on the phone with the engineer, you know, or like whatever the case may be, prove me wrong, and then I'll think about changing it. I'd be like, "Whoa, whoa, whoa."
They're risking their lives for that, and they don't even care.
Yeah, I'd feel like, I don't think I'm gonna go
Yeah.
if we're not sure about this, like 100%.
Yeah.
How do you think that NASA developed a culture like that? Like, how does that start? If it in the beginning it was, you know, they took things a little more seriously. How did it get to the point where people were laid back and arrogant?
I think it's because they did come out on top of the industry.
Yeah.
They got to be number one, and then they started drifting and didn't realize that they were drifting downhill.
Totally agree with that. It goes back to, I think it reminded me of the case of the Army crew case and the senior team. Like once you're known for being like really good at something, you focus on that, and you just want to keep up at that, and then you just fall behind in everything else. So they focused on like their image to the public and making sure that they were meeting their goals instead of focusing on improving what they already had established and working together at it to improve it.
Yeah, they just plateaued. I think that's really what it comes down to, is that they hit their peak and then they just stayed the same, and they didn't try and, like Kyle was saying, they just drifted away from goals, from trying to succeed. They just wanted to remain the best but not work for it.
Yeah.
Right.
I think they didn't have established processes for employees to follow, because it says that they were a matrix organization with over 24,000 employees, so they needed to have like a way to do things. I think they didn't.
Yeah.
Right, and I think kind of what we're all saying, there's what the discussion describes is a shared cognitive framing, and so that's a behavior where everybody kind of pushes in and they simplify something that's complicated, and they just kind of get lazy about it.
Yeah.
And that's what I think, that's a big problem that led to this disaster.
Have any of you seen the movie Monsters vs. Aliens, the cartoon one?
No.
No.
Okay, I have kids, so that's why I've seen it. But at the beginning, the government detects the alien spaceship or something, and the guy starts freaking out, saying, "Nothing ever happens. I took this job because we don't have to do anything, and nothing happens."
Yeah.
I felt like that's relatable to what they ended up being.
Mhm.
Mhm.
I think also like with NASA, you know, like when people make it into NASA, they think they made it big, you know, and so once they reach that employment, I feel like they kind of like, oh, like I made it, like, you know, I don't need to work hard anymore. And so, but that's not the case, and I don't think they're pushing their employees to solve problems quickly, to, you know, excel in different things and make goals and contribute, I guess.
Yeah.
So that's what leading into our next thought, like as far as it goes, and I'll admit that when I was reading this, I didn't have the clearest understanding of who was doing what. But let's talk for a minute about exactly what happened and who was on each side of the argument, and who, I mean, there's people and there's minor organizations within NASA that all took a stance. So who has any thoughts on what happened there?
Well, just because it's fresh in my mind,
Okay.
the last page, McCormick, she was on the DAT, the debris analyst team, and it said she relayed the team's findings, and McCormick is a he. He mentioned that although uncertainties exist and there was one scenario still to run, they concluded that there was no safety of flight issue and that no catastrophic damage would occur. And then Rocha, who was in the meeting, said that they didn't think McCormick was transparent enough about the uncertainties of their findings.
Right.
So it sounded like McCormick was part of the problem, and Rocha, however you pronounce it, was on this side that was like, this is kind of a problem.
Right. I thought it was interesting that it said about Rocha's email. She said this is like an irresponsible answer to not request any when they're talking about, like, let's get some pictures from the spy, not the shuttle, the satellite, and it's like everybody battled over that. Like, nobody knows where this is coming from. You know, that's one thing that stuck out to me, is it's like, why are we not, like, why are we fighting over who requested the pictures? Why don't we all, like, want to work as a team and see what's going on there?
Yeah, when they requested the pictures, they said, like, I don't know if they requested, like, nobody knew anything. How can they not know such an important thing? And they had their cameras. They never repaired them, so it was really, yeah.
Yeah, I also think that, like, because there was no, like, teamwork, there was no, like, nobody wanted to be accountable, or like nobody wanted to be, like, responsible and take ownership of, like, the problem.
Right. So who would we say, if we had to place the accountability, what
Mhm.
I mean, what are all of our opinions on who should be held accountable for this?
Great question.
I think
That's the one that kind of
like
stumps
this-
me, honestly, because it's like there's so many problems and so many people.
Yeah, because it was a lot of it was management.
Yeah.
And like the DAT, they didn't really do their job because they were
Mhm.
supposed to be the ones who was finding out what was going on. But before that even became an issue, it was like what was mentioned earlier, nobody was maintaining the equipment. So it's a lot of people are at fault, I think.
Yeah, I don't really know the names, but definitely the management. Yeah.
Yeah. I would also say it's like management, not any specific, like one of them, but all of them, because they collectively chose not to, like they just all said that it was an accepted risk. So, and they all, agreed to that. So I would definitely say
Right. And one thought that I just had was that the guy who was supposed to get the spy pictures. Let's see here. Refresh my memory. So Hale, the Hale guy, said that he was going to get the pictures and it took 5 days, and he could do that because he had top secret clearance. I was thinking about him, and it made me wonder, with all of the confusion and with everybody who didn't really know what was going on or who had any authority, it made me wonder what good it would have done if they would have gotten the pictures anyway. Because, I mean, who would have stepped up and said, okay, we've got to do something before we can try and bring them back through the atmosphere? So it's like the whole organization just is like extremely.
Yeah, but I think they did the same thing with the pictures as they did with the phone debris thing, because they just like ignored it. They didn't care about the pictures. They took 5 days to get them or more. So they just were doing the same thing, like ignoring problems and not trying to solve them.
Right. So what are some elements of teamwork or like improving the structure of the system that what would we all suggest to NASA after reading this of ways that they could improve?
Understanding the
So-
importance of their jobs, that there's lives at risk, and they need to do their job 100% each time, no matter what it is.
Yeah. Also, in the beginning, let me just quickly find the page. On page 2, when they noticed that there was like a problem with Apollo 13, when it says that he specifically focused on the problem, and he developed and trained his teams to deal with the different kinds of emergencies, and he pushed them to like think creatively and out of the box in order to specifically solve that problem. So I think if the leader had facilitated that teamwork from the beginning, that would have solved a lot of problems.
I think they also need to trust the expertise of some of the employees too. Like if they're in part of a certain department and stuff like that, they should trust their opinions, trust their information they can give them, and use it. And I think the one problem I had was that the management they didn't. I feel like they didn't get enough information to realize what was like how much of a problem this was going to be. And I think that sometimes they kind of overlook, what the lower employees think, and it's like
Mhm.
sometimes they bring a lot more to the table than you think, and then this happens and it's like, I kind of told you so, but you didn't listen to me, but I didn't really push it at all. So it's like, I think the other employees needed to kind of push that this was a big deal and that management needs to take it to the next level. And I don't remember where I read, but I think they said something about somebody was offended because they jumped their line of communications and went to somebody else who was higher up. But it's like, that was the only way to get things done so it's like that line of communication is not there, and it's, people get hurt over someone else voicing their opinions, and that's not how it should be.
Right. I like
Yeah.
I like what you said. That reminds me of the guy that said that you don't really share your opinions with anyone on a higher rung on the ladder than you. Everybody, you just kind of share what you think with the people who are equal to you, and it doesn't really go anywhere.
Mm-hmm.
And I think, that's obviously a culture that was created,
Yeah.
by that book that you described.
Are we reading the speed of trust in this course?
Yeah.
I think
Yeah.
so.
Yeah. So this is I have so many courses I get confused. So this is like a low trust company, right? Because there's a lot of bureaucracy.
Mhm.
There's a lot of secrets. People don't listen to each other. They're scared of talking because they feel ignored, right? So they should, get those techniques of the high trust companies to definitely get better. They should also get someone to supervise when they have to how do you say this? You have to check on the technical things of the shuttles, because they were just letting those things go, and those were important things, right?
Mhm.
Right.
I definitely
one other-
agree that sorry.
No, go ahead. You're good.
One of the, I think it was Rocha, like he wrote in an email, like, in my humble technical opinion.
Yeah.
You shouldn't really have to say that. If you're making a suggestion, or if you're providing a specific expertise, you're good at that for a specific reason. So
Yeah. Well, one thing another thing I thought about was the idea of having like everybody has a job and they know their job and it works with everybody else. I kind of thought it was interesting that the thought to have the spy satellites take a picture came from a couple different places, and then it was unauthorized and nobody knew where it came from. But I feel like if everybody had a job and knew their job, and there was like a clear cut, this is what you do and this is who you report to, that wouldn't have been
Yes.
as much of an issue.
Yeah.
Let's see. Does anyone have any more thoughts or questions that they want to raise concerning this case?
I don't know. I just felt like they put it so lightly, the consequences that could happen if they messed up, and I don't think they realized. I don't know, and it was hard for me to read this and how lightly they took people's lives. I work as a pharmacy technician, and every day I'm always like, I need to help these people that I'm working with work better to help other people, and I think that they're not wanting to help. They want to help themselves. They don't want to help the group. They don't want to help the astronauts that are going off. And that was just very unappealing, because you don't want to work for a company that's not going to have your back, especially your own life. So it just, I don't know. That was something that was very discouraging.
Yeah, and what surprised me, I was just like, how do people, how are they going back and volunteering their lives?
Right.
Like, so many people are dying. I wouldn't have wanted to work for them.
Yeah, they were not transparent at all.
Mhm.
Yeah, well,
And
I'm
it's
thinking
like,
about that. They were in space for how many days before they actually told them that there was an issue, and then they brushed it off. Like,
right.
oh, there's this thing. It's hardly worth
Yeah.
mentioning.
Yeah.
You're cool. Like, don't worry about it.
Yeah. And it's like the astronauts couldn't like adapt. Like, you know, they're in space not knowing anything that's happening, and you know, they can probably help figure out what to do or whatever. I mean, they are on the spacecraft, but it's like they didn't want to communicate with them.
Right.
Then they died, and now it's like, what the heck? I don't know.
Yeah. Well, I think that we've touched on some extremely important issues as far as kind of working on our, teamwork and communication, and like being humble and working together, and how things like that, having a set structure lined out would have made that could have made all the difference in the world here. Or like we discussed, having that attitude that you don't have to prove to me that there's something wrong for me to believe you, but just you suggesting it, like, let's look into it, and let's actually take things seriously. It made me think about the kind of company that I want to work for someday, and how I want to work for a company that's going to be like, listens to my problems and we work together. There's a little unity instead of this certain group is working on this thing and they're not really doing it, and nobody's checking on them.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
This little
I
group.
also think like
Go ahead, Snake.
I also think that management like abused their power, like because they knew that they had the power to make the final decision. They didn't trust their employees. Like I don't know, that really annoyed me. Like if you hire me for a specific to provide specific expertise, then trust me when I tell you that this is going to like jeopardize or going to put everybody in like the astronauts in danger. Believe me when I tell you that, because I know what I'm doing, so they just
Right.
didn't trust their employee, and they abuse their power, which is like interesting because you're supposed to like they are the ones that are making this happen, so you should be like working with them and help.
Right. Like if I was one of those engineers, I literally would have been like, I shouldn't have just come to work for like the last 2 weeks and worked on this because nobody cares anyway.
But I don't know how much they believe. I think the managers knew there was something wrong with that, at least a little bit, because it was kind of obvious. But I think that they just decided to ignore it because they were under so much pressure and they wanted to get things done. And how wrong is that to know something's bad and just send people to say, knowing that something can happen?
Right. One last, like, another thought that I just had that I wanted to ask is, does anyone know who chose the management? Is that like a government? Was there like a government agency who hired them, or?
I don't think so. I don't think it ever really said. I mean, it mentions like what president was in office during the time,
Mm-hmm.
and some people that they partnered with, some organizations that they partnered with, but it didn't really say like how they came to their position. Because let's see, they opened in 1958. And when did they launch the Columbia? (2003).
2003.
Yeah, so there had to be people from who have kind of worked their way up.
Yeah.
Right. I don't know. I think that's
Did you?
interesting too to see who chooses the leaders that kind of set that standard or that culture for the organization.
I think they also were trying to appeal to like, I think it's like, don't they go off like sponsors and stuff like that, like different kinds of funding? So it's like at the beginning of the case, didn't it say, I've read so many case studies this week, but I think it said something in the beginning about how that as soon as a problem happened, they wanted to shut all communication with anybody so that no one would know that this is a problem NASA would be having. And I thought that was just like, something's wrong whenever you don't want anyone to know that something's wrong. So it's like,
Yeah.
and that in itself is kind of a scary time. Like, I don't know. That's just my own thoughts. I don't know where I was going with that. But
Yeah. So if you
Yeah, I
shut
agree.
something out, like nobody to know about it, so the investors, I guess, are not going to be skeptical and like pulling out. But I don't know. I think they should be the first people to know. And people are also going to doubt the leadership too.
Right. Well, it makes me wonder who's in charge of NASA now. 13 years later, if those same people are still running it, or
Yeah, I had a photography teacher who actually worked at NASA as a photographer.
oh yeah,
Yeah, they seem to have gotten better. He said they were doing tests, and during one of the tests, a machine dented something that it wasn't supposed to, but you couldn't see it with the naked eye. So he had to. We were talking about light, and he had to put the light a certain way so that he could capture the image to send it to people to be analyzed. It was that small of a dent, but they realized that it was a potential issue.
Great. They learned.
Yeah,
yeah.
at the time.
That's good. Well, and I think about like learning in NASA, like in grade school, and how they talk about like the measurements of everything they do. It's like within thousandths of an inch, and I'm like, and then I read this, and I'm like, that
just some
doesn't
debris.
work out.
It's
Yeah.
not that much.
It's only a 600-pound chunk of whatever coming down in the spaceship.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I mean, 2003 wasn't that long ago.
Yeah.
It's kind of crazy reading about that case because I remember seeing that on the news.
It's crazy because you think of these companies and you just think the best of them. Like, you want to work for NASA because it's there's so much that you can learn from there, and there's so many things that they develop and make. So it's this ideal company, but you can never think that behind it they have so many problems.
Well, it kind of goes back to like Titanic in a way, like Titanic was like a really nice ship, like all these experts built it, and and it failed. And it's like a lot of people learned from Titanic, they learned about how safety precautions and like things that they could add to the ship to make it more, safe and ease the minds of the passengers. But I feel like NASA isn't doing that. Well, at least in this case study, it's like they didn't want to try and make it safer. They didn't want to waste their resources and their time on something that could be something that would never happen.
Yeah, another similarity between this and Titanic. I mean, it was both kind of management that caused the problem.
And arrogance.
Yeah, I don't remember exactly what it was with the Titanic, but the captain realized that there was a problem coming. He kind of foreseen something, but the owners and the company said, no, we have to be successful at this.
Yeah. Well, I guess that's like another thing that we can take away from this case study and this discussion as well, is that things as they seem on the outside, things aren't always as they might look really great, and then you find out that they're if there's major problems. So we gotta be careful in what we do and who we deal with, and
Not
And
work
I
for
just
NASA.
also think that, like putting this into a personal thing, that well, this me, I sometimes ignore problems that I'm having, like personal problems, just like hoping they'll go away, and they become worse, right? So I think we should always deal with that in like a personal level or organization.
Mhm.
That is an excellent point.
Sweet. I think we've had a really good discussion. I appreciate everybody's time and participation. So I think we'll call it a meeting. I didn't do it when we started out, but I guess everybody pray for Mike because he's got
Yeah.
some issues there. So
Cellulitis. Yeah.
does anybody know what that
Yeah.
is?
Yeah, I work at the hospital,
Mm-hmm.
and I've seen some people with pretty bad cases, and it's like a type of bacteria, I think.
Okay.
I don't know exactly, but I've seen some pretty bad cases of it. So.
Okay. All right. Well, I guess we'll go ahead and end the broadcast.